So tell me a little bit about what it is that your business itself is all about.
So our business is really unique. And I would like to say and like to think that I pioneered the space. So what we do, the technical name for what we do is called mortgage-backed securities.
Ah,
However, we define it, we make it simple and say we buy whole loans. And what that's about is the banks, most people don't know this, but the banks are looking to liquidate their assets constantly because we use something that's called currency, but we think we use money, but we're not using money, right? And so the currency needs to constantly flow around and around. So the bank understands that. So the bank looks to liquidate its assets all the time. I mean, I'm talking about billions and billions of dollars worth every single month. So when the bank is looking to liquidate its assets, we actually purchase those assets from the banks at a discount. So let's say if someone is has a home loan and the home loan is, let's say, 500,000, the bank may sell that loan to us for, let's say, 100,000. And what they do, because everybody asks the question, why would a bank do that? Well, the bank understands that the dollar is constantly depreciating and that any loss that they take, they get to write it off to the FDIC. So the bank is constantly circulating its assets, and we buy those assets at a discount, and then we step in and we service the loan for the homeowner.
that's awesome. I love that. It's really interesting because there's a lot of intricacies there around what the product itself is that I'm sure a lot of people are not 100% familiar with. But to give you a little background on the world that I came from, I worked at JP Morgan Chase for a few years and I was in securities based lending. And so it was all based on the stock market as the assets rather than the homes themselves. And so I find this really fascinating. I also worked a little bit in the mortgage world as a construction loan analyst. So I got to help
Hmm.
disperse funds for new construction builds and things of that nature. So help me understand kind of what that process looks like for people who, I guess what I'm trying to ask is the banks want to offload this. So who do they normally go to in order to offload those loans?
So originally, the bank was only doing it from bank to bank because they had created a seamless process, right? And sometimes the bank would do something, they would offload these assets so the bank wouldn't go into what they call receivership, right? Which is essentially them being acquired, right? Receivership is when a bank is acquired by another bank. So what we did is we came in and we said, well, you know, all of this stuff is happening with the banks. We can see it leading up to that, right? Because I'm kind of a geeky type of guy and I'm studying all kinds of stuff. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute. If the bank is holding assets already, so this is pre 2008, if the banks are holding these assets and the assets are not performing. And to just give a backstory, my wife and I, we started as real estate wholesalers. And what we would do is we would go to homes and we would try to broker the sale between a seller and one of our buyers. But we started noticing that every home we went into, that the loan was upside down and the mortgage was the thing that was in play. The mortgage determined whether we were going to be able to make a profit or not. So if the home was, let's say, 100 grand, and the mortgage was 100 grand, then there was no room for us to make a profit anywhere if we made the sale. So we started noticing that there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of homes that we were going to that had these adjustable rate mortgages. So, and they were all upside down. And I was saying, to my wife that if homeowners started defaulting on these loans, which they will default, then the banks and the economy are going to be in huge trouble. So we have been sort of preparing, and we have begun to go to banks and say to them, would you offload some of these assets that you are not getting paid for? And the banks were like, we would love to, but we don't know how to because you're not a bank. So we began to orchestrate this process between us and the bank, and it took probably 2 years for us to figure this process out on how they could actually liquidate assets to us. I mean, getting the contracts drawn up, checking securities laws, making sure that, we were on a straight and narrow and everything like that. And then even to the point where that we would be able to handle the portfolios that they were trying to liquidate to us. Now, some of the portfolios, of course, we couldn't handle because they were in like the $50 billion range and stuff like that. So, we had to weed through all of that to get to a point where we were like, now, yes, we can begin to handle assets at this level. And we were sort of off to the races at that point. And again, most people still don't understand this business, the process, or even know how it works. Even like, top people on Wall Street, because the assets, when they liquidate them, they don't pay like let's say a FINRA broker. Like a broker can't really get a percentage of the sale because it's considered a trash asset. But we began to understand that there are homeowners, families, children, people going to school, husband and wives going to work. We understood because we were wholesalers going in, talking to these families, that they were great people. Although the financial asset may look like it's trash, it's connected to a piece of physical real estate with a family in it. So that's sort of how we kind of, got into the business.
That's really cool. I like that wholesaling background and kind of how it weaved into where you're at now. So, what was kind of like the process that led you to being where you're at now, from going from wholesaling and understanding like the process itself of being able to get those offloaded assets from the banks?
First of all, it was a very confusing and difficult process, an arduous process, because you have several different entities that's coming together to try to make this thing happen. So you got to look at it from the securities perspective, right? So the securities perspective is one asset. Like what you're doing, are you violating any securities laws, right? So that's important to understand, to make sure that not only are you compliant, but that you're over compliant. And then it's like, well, wait a minute. How does this actually tie into the real estate aspect of it, right? And how do we make sense of one and make that line up with the sense of the next thing? And then you have, the homeowner and those laws. How is the homeowner still protected and taken care of throughout this process? And throughout the process in many different ways. Like, for an instance, what if we decided to have the homeowner refinanced by another institution? What is that process like? What if we decided to have the homeowner put the homeowner in a loan modification program? What is that process like? What if the homeowner needed a foreclosure, right? What is that process like? So to take in consideration all these variables took a lot of time, thought, ingenuity, late nights, stand up, stressing to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So it was arduous, but well worth it.
If you're interested in learning more about the tidbits and advice that they have, then you should consider subscribing to the Two Comma Club newsletter, where you'll get daily updates and advice on the podcast and the things that we are learning from the individuals who have made at least $1 million. Just go to 2ccnewsletter.com or click the link in the description down below and subscribe.